Magalhael to Stokes, who's onside. 1-0.
Here's Sims. It's a good serve this from Southampton. They could finish the job here. It's Shane Long, and he has done it. Just a minute to play. That's stoppage time. Here's Letizia. Who better to say farewell than one of the finest players ever to wear the red and white.
Hello and welcome to episode 96 of the Saints FC podcast, and a very, very special episode. One of our listeners and budding future podcaster, Ben Miller, has come up with a fantastic idea for asking celebrity football fans for their best ever 11 for the team that they support. Now, Ben is a Saints fan, as well as being a listener of our show, and he has managed to find another celebrity Saints fan to speak to and choose their favourite starting 11 for Saints. So first up, in this episode, we have Ben speaking to Ed Chamberlin from Sky Sports, and you'll probably recognise him and get to hear throughout the episode that he's a really big Saints fan as well. Of course, this is a kind of concept podcast for Ben at this point, so please do get in contact with us and let us know what you think of the podcast. The usual email address, saintsfcpodcast@gmail.com. Let us know what you think of the episode. Let us know if you want to hear more celebrity Saints fans choosing their 11, and of course let us know who would make it into your Saints 11 as well, and that could be a fantastic talking point for myself and Tom, and maybe we'll get Ben onto one of the shows as well and talk about his favourite players as well at some point in the future. So at this point I'm going to hand over to Ben, and I do hope you really enjoy this fantastic episode that he's recorded for us.
Hello and welcome to Ultimate 11, a brand new show that gets famous football fans to pick their all-time favourite 11 for the team that they support. This is the first episode, and I'm delighted to say that we're joined by Sky Sports News presenter and ITV racing presenter, and most importantly, Southampton fan, Ed Chamberlin. Ed, welcome to the show.
Ben, thank you very much for having me on. Very flattered to be invited.
Yeah, I mean, in at the ground floor, first ever guest. So yeah, we're delighted to have you, and thanks for being here.
What an honour. Wow. Hopefully we'll do it justice.
How are you? How's lockdown been for you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah. I'm feeling very fortunate to be working. Racing got up and running in June, even before the football. So I've been out and about, and it's been pretty miserable, if I'm honest. I'm working at empty racecourses, and it's a bit desolate. But at the same time, you feel very fortunate to be working at such a difficult time. And sport has got a big role to play in boosting the health of the nation, really. Football is a big part of everyone's lives at the moment, lifting spirits, and the sport I'm involved in is much smaller than football, but very, very important for livelihoods and just giving everyone that little bit of an escape and a boost, hopefully, at such a difficult time.
Yeah, and it's such a weird time at the moment with fans not being able to get to games. So hopefully shows like this will give them something to enjoy whilst we wait for the grounds to reopen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. We all need little things like this because, it's so sad, isn't it, watching the football? I think I'm lucky in racing. If you're watching on the TV, you don't really notice the difference with the big horse races, be they the Derby, Royal Ascot. The races look exactly the same. With football, it's much more evident. We don't have to pump through fake crowd noise because you don't really need it. And football is very, very different to watch. I'm one of the few people, I think, that watches without the crowd noise, which I find fascinating, actually. I like to hear what the managers are saying and what Ralph is shouting and so on and so forth. But at ITV, they actually use the crowd noise. I think the research is that I think about 75% of viewers prefer the pumped in crowd noise.
Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting. I've tried both, and
preference.
I feel like having the crowd noise on is better when it's a game you're not paying particular interest to. If it's just sort of on in the background, it's good to have the crowd noise. But I agree with you. It's really, really interesting being able to hear the players and the staff and all the people on the touchline because there's no crowd noise and the microphones are picking it up.
Having said that, when Theo shot on goal and Vestergaard headed it home, you did want to hear a massive roar, I suppose, didn't you?
Yes,
So
that was a real shame to not hear the Saints away fans.
Exactly.
Did you get to watch the game? Because you were at Ascot on Saturday, weren't you?
I was at Ascot. It was Champions Day, so we came off air at 4:30, and I was having a debrief in the car park, resigned to the fact we were going to lose 3-2, and my director on ITV Racing, a guy called Paul McNamara, who's a BAFTA-winning director on ITV. He's directed World Cup finals in football and rugby and all sorts, and directs the racing now, which is great. But he's a mad saint, and his Twitter handle, I think, is Saint Macca, which says it all. He screamed at me across the car park, "We've equalised!" So the production meeting after this massive day at Ascot on Saturday was broken up as I raced to his car to give him a massive high five. So yeah, I went home with a big spring in my step after that. So I have to admit, on Saturday I wasn't expecting to get anything, which was great. I remember it reminded me of the day I was actually at the game, which was Nigel Adkins' final game. Actually, I went with Ray Wilkins, who was a great mate of mine, bless him, the late great Ray Wilkins. And we were in his season tickets, when we drew 2-2 there, when we were 2-0 down. And it was a very similar sort of occasion and result, really. I remember I stayed behind that game and had a chat to Nigel, who was ecstatic, and a couple of days later he was gone, poor guy.
So, I mean, let's talk about the team. How was it for you picking your all-time favourite Southampton 11? Must have been tough.
Absolute nightmare, to be honest. Out on dog walks and talking to friends, and I've got an 11-year-old son, thankfully, who's absolutely Southampton mad. Now I don't work in football. He knows far more about it than me. Football's now, having been totally engrossed in it for 20 years of my life working in football, really. 14 of them on Sky Sports News and doing soccer specials, making Jeff Stelling look good. And then obviously doing the big job at Sky Sports on Super Sunday and Monday Night Football for 6 years. It totally consumes you. And now to be on the outside of it and have football as a hobby, you get a bit detached from it, which I quite like, actually, because it was all consuming. And now he's the one who keeps me up to date and everything. And he's had a look at my team and disagrees with most of it because he hasn't heard of half the players, even Letizier's, a name he knows, but he gets to see him in the 100 Club on the TV rather than having watched him ever live. So he's had a little bit of an input. And then I showed it to a few friends of mine and they agreed with so. It's great. It's a really good idea of yours, this, because it gets everyone talking and it's been really, really good fun.
Brilliant. Yeah, well, we're really excited to hear your team. But before we get into who you've actually picked, we need to know your formation. So tell us, how are you going to be lining?
I'm going to play 4-4-2.
Okay, nice. Classic.
With one player who you can probably guess, who has a bit of flexibility in that 4-4-2, because I don't think down his side of the pitch where I've got him playing, he's going to be particularly disciplined. So there will be some flexibility in this side.
Yeah, I think I know who you're talking about. I mean, to be honest, we should probably just call this Ultimate 10 plus Matt Le Tissier, because I can't really imagine any Southampton fan would pick their all-time favourite 11 without him being in the team.
But Ben, you can imagine for me, I hope you don't mind a few little stories along the way, but he wouldn't be my ultimate Saints player, which is quite well documented on social media, who my favourite Saints player of all time is, but he's right up there. And I just absolutely loved him, like we all did. And then the night when I found out that I was doing a soccer special, I used to do the midweek ones. It was a Tuesday night, and it was the first one I had when Matt Le Tissier was on the panel. You imagine how difficult that was for me presenting. So at the end of the desk with your absolute hero sat 3 feet to your left, it's quite hard to focus on your present. I was actually nervous wreck. It was pathetic. And then obviously since then, I'd like to think we've become good mates, and he plays in my golf day, and he's just quickly discover not only is he arguably the greatest player in Southampton history, but he's also one of the nicest, down-to-earth, normal people you could ever wish to meet. The only thing I was disappointed, and I hope he won't mind me saying this because he'll probably listen to this, Tiz, but his diet was dreadful. I couldn't believe. And Merce, who sat to his left on that panel, I had McAnally, can't remember who the fourth was, probably Charlie Nicholas, and Merson and Le Tissier. I just couldn't believe, two absolute greats were eating just rubbish, from chips to crisps. And as the presenter, you try and help them to start with, because I was so nervous working with them. I try not to go to them for an update on their game while they were eating. But as I got to know them, that very quickly became sort of part of the fun and part of the game, to go for an update at their match while they had a mouthful of pizza or something and see how they improvised. And Letizia was much shrewder than Merson in that regard, I can assure you.
I've only ever met Matt Le Tissier once, and he was coming out of a TGI Fridays in Southampton.
Oh, no.
But I mean, it was it was in the evening, and it was after he'd stopped playing, so I think he deserved it by that time.
But he's got time for everybody, Letiz. He's got time for everybody.
Yeah.
He'll talk to anyone. He's just, and the best thing to do with him is just ask him for a round of golf, because then you've got the best chance of spending time with him, because he's, as you know, obsessed by the game and a damn good player as well.
Cool. So 4-4-2. Who's in goal? Who's your keeper?
Keeper was relatively straightforward, actually. We've had some good keepers of late, and Kelvin Davis is a club legend and just such a nice bloke and such a big part of the football club. But in terms of goalkeepers, I think Tim Flowers was close, but you've got to go with Peter Shilton. I think people forget just how long he was at the club for and how many times he played for England while he was at Southampton. And he's just an absolute goalkeeping great, isn't he? And it's amazing to think that we've had the likes of Keegan and Shilton and all these guys playing at our football club. And anyone younger might not understand it, but I think anyone as old as me will understand that Shilton was just head and shoulders above everyone else. A great goalkeeper that played for Southampton for a good deal of time. So I think Peter Shilton was one of the easier decisions in my team. I think Tim Flowers would be the backup.
Yeah, I mean, Shilton, even though he played until he was about 106, he was before my time, unfortunately. So I never got to see him play in the flesh or even on TV. But yeah, just hearing the stories of him as England goalkeeper mainly, and seeing the footage of those World Cup, he was just absolutely fantastic goalkeeper.
Yeah, just he never made a mistake, Shilton. Absolutely rock solid. And at a time when England had a number of great goalkeepers. You know, Ray Clements and co. are great goalkeepers in their own right. So it's not like he was in the position with no competition. There were some great goalkeepers around. He was head and shoulders above all of them. And I mean, I can't really, you know, if you think about a Shilton mistake, you probably think Maradona handball, and that wasn't his fault. He was just so reliable, Shilton. He was just a brilliant goalkeeper.
In your team, is he booting it long, or is he playing it out from the back?
He has the option to boot it long when you find out who's up front. Absolutely. I think you'd probably hit it long more than you'd play out from the back, and you certainly didn't do it too much in that really good team we had of the early 80s. So he definitely had that option, but he could throw it out to his left as well. But we'll come to that.
Well, let's start on the left then. Who's your left back? Who's Shilton rolling it out to?
Left back is one of the areas of strength for Southampton Football Club. We just have a succession of really good left backs. Our academy specialised in left backs. And while we're on that, I think Jake Vokins will be the next big name in the Southampton team, actually. I think he's the absolute star of the future. And a lot of people will go for Gareth Bale in their team, I'm sure. I'm sure a lot of people will go for Wayne Bridge. And I've slightly been ruled by my heart over my head here. And he was a bit, when I first started going to watch Southampton, this guy who I've chosen was an absolute hate figure. He was a bit of a joke in Franny Benali. He took so much stick, but he stuck at it. And he's a little bit like the two characters I work with at Sky in Jamie Carragher and Gary Neville. Franny sort of falls into that category where I think he'd admit he wasn't the most talented player in the team by any means, but my goodness, he got every last drop of ability he had onto the football pitch. And Carragher and Neville were exactly the same. Gary was a better cricketer, and actually Philip was a better cricketer than Gary, than he was a footballer, but football was the path they chose. And through sheer guts and determination and hard work, you know, he played 86 times for England. And Carragher wasn't dissimilar, really. Carragher, you know, at international level was pretty useless, really. But at club level, just through sheer hard work and determination, he turned himself into a Liverpool great. And Franny was a little bit like that at Southampton. And I hope he won't be too upset with me saying it, but it was pure graft and determination that turned him into an iconic left back. And I've chosen him, one, because of his dedication to the club, and two, because he's just the nicest man in the world.
Yeah.
He is such a great guy, and is obviously now an ambassador for the club, and you see him on TV and all his heroics raising money. He is just one of life's legends. Lots of head, but plenty of heart has got him in my team.
Yeah, I mean, what a great... He's just absolutely solid, wasn't he? I think that was the thing. not the most talented, not the sort of most technically gifted, but would not make a mistake and would die for that team.
Absolutely, heart on his sleeve. But my God, Ben, honestly, some of the tackles, some of the Benali tackles would be X-rated these days. And he looked with his moustache. He looked like a waiter, and he's just such a dude. He's such a dude, and he's ahead. He's ahead of some players there who've had at left back who are far more talented than him. But you'd want him on the team sheet. You'd want him in the trenches, and he's a club legend, Franny, absolute club legend, and great to see him still. That's one thing we do well now with the hierarchy club is integrating Franny and Matt, and I think that's really healthy now, and both do a lot of good. So delighted to have Franny in the team, and I honestly would feel so guilty if I'd left him out.
Yeah, I mean, especially since he's been running for the past 365 days, it seems like, I mean, what a freak. It's just absolutely incredible.
I had a tear in my eye that I was there that day when he ran into the stadium, and it was a very emotive moment, what he'd been through. And he'd put his family through absolute hell to do it, but in typical Franny fashion, he'd done it and got a great welcome from the Saints fans that day. It was a really, really great occasion.
Yeah, true. And like you said, some fantastic left backs we've had over the years. You named a few and didn't even get to, Bertrand at the moment, who
and brilliant player.
Is a Champions League winner. what a player to not even make it into the sort of top 3 or 4 Southampton left backs.
Brilliant player. He could play, he can play in a 5, he can play centrally. Yeah. Again, you're absolutely right. We probably don't appreciate what Ryan does until he eventually moves on. But honestly, to fill his boots, Vokins is going to be an absolute superstar.
And so what about centre-backs standing next to Franny Benali?
So it gets harder here. I put it's 3 into 2, and I'm open to change here, Ben. And I'm loath to leave out Klaus Lundekvam, who was a bit of a hero for me for many, many years. I never actually met him. And I've read a lot about him afterwards, and he's had a few difficulties and so on. But he was a real great servant for the club. So I'm reluctant to leave him out. But it comes down to 3. So I've got a perm 2 from 3. And I'm not leaving out Jose. Jose Font is one of my all-time favourite Southampton players who, when we talk about captaincy, he's on the shortlist for captaincy, because I don't think we appreciate just how good he was. I think the players he played alongside, your Lovrens and Van Dijks, looked better players because they played with Jose. Plus, he was our leader. My goodness, we've missed him. He's been our biggest miss. Everyone talks about Virgil and how we've not been the same since Virgil left. Well, Jose, for me, was a bigger miss because he was the leader. He was the talisman on and off the pitch. And we've never really replaced that. The thing that's been missing in the Southampton team, I think, in the last few years has been real leadership. And that's what we had with Jose. So Jose's in, I think. And then it comes down to a choice between Virgil van Dijk, who was just a Rolls Royce, and Mark Wright, who, Ben, you're probably too young to have really appreciated, but in the 80s, he was proper centre-half for England and Southampton, and after that, Liverpool. A proper player, Mark Wright. Got himself in a few scrapes with Laurie McMenemy, and there was a few controversial moments involving him, and he was a character, as you might have seen on the ITV Legends programme with Harry Redknapp. Good guy, Mark Wright. So it's a real shootout between the brilliance and mercurial nature of Virgil van Dijk, which we only enjoyed for a couple of seasons, and Mark Wright, who had that longevity and was tough. And I'm loath to leave him out, but I just think Virgil was so good. He's the best centre-half I've seen in the Premier League, and to have him at Southampton Football Club for the time we did, how lucky were we to see him? He had everything: stature, range of passing, scored goals. So I think I might pair Van Dijk and Font, which I think is a very strong central defensive partnership, which I think, took us to great heights for a while, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Font and Van Dijk were one of, if not the best centre-back partnerships Southampton probably ever had in the Premier League. I mean, when Van Dijk first came in, he was just absolutely world-class and was probably the best player in that team for a long time.
He just has a presence, but he's also got an absolute calmness about him. An absolute, that's what's made the difference at Liverpool. The goalkeeper's helped, I'm sure, as well, but he radiates calm around him. And I think that's a huge thing. And at Southampton, at times it just looked too easy for him. It really did. As I say, he was just an absolute Rolls Royce at centre-half, and the best I've seen in the Premier League, I think.
I mean, yeah, Jose Fonte was fantastic for Southampton. I think it probably helped that he played for as long as he did in the lower leagues with that Southampton team, because he was the rock of the team that got promoted, from League One and then from the Championship.
He never got that credit, I didn't think, largely because the players he played alongside. But as I said earlier, he made them look good as well. They relied upon him. And yeah, he was a huge part of the club at a difficult time as well, don't forget. And yeah, he'll go down as one of our best ever players, I think. But he was such a great guy. I'll never forget him, because he won various awards when I hosted the end of season awards. And everyone would always laugh at him because he was so vain. And Jose spent, I think, twice as long as any other player in the shower probably getting ready. He always looked amazing, Jose. And took a lot of pride in that. Had some dodgy outfits as well. He's on Instagram. He'll probably listen to this as well. So sorry, Jose.
And big Klaus Lundekvam doesn't even get a look in.
I feel bad about that. I told you I feel bad about that.
What a hero.
Yeah, I totally get that, which is why I wanted to get his name in early. And friends won't forgive me for leaving him out, because he stuck, he played in some pretty ordinary Southampton teams and was Southampton through and through for a long time. Yeah, I'm reluctant. I'm more reluctant to leave Mark Ricehead, actually, because he's one of England's great centre halves, let alone Southampton's, and I've left him out of the team. I mean, how harsh is that?
Yeah, very true. But yeah, I think that's a great partnership, though. Fonte and Van Dijk. I mean,
we'll go with that, shall we? I actually came into this. I hadn't totally made up my mind, but I have now, so we'll go with that.
Okay, Fonte and Van Dijk, fantastic. And then right back.
This is the hardest decision of the whole team. This and who to play up front were the hardest decisions in this team. The midfield I found easy. At right back, it came down to 4, and I'm very biased because Jason Dodd is one of my favourite people. I keep bumping into Jason and loved him for a long time. Mick Mills was a bit of a hero growing up. Nathaniel Klein had a great spell at right back. And Ivan Golak, who you won't probably remember, is he was a real groundbreaker at his time. One of the best overseas players we've ever had, actually. Could have played in central defence, but I think probably gets into my team at right back from a golden age for the team in the 80s, the team I grew up watching. So I think I'm going to go with Ivan Golak for us oldies to use a bit of racing parlance, to beat Jason Dodd in a very close photograph. And I'm low, honestly, this is so painful to leave. And he's another person I played cricket against. He plays cricket for the Lord's Taverners when I play for Glorious Goodwood. I play for Lord March's 11. It sounds very grand, but the fact that him and I are playing in it shows you it's not. After the first day of Glorious Goodwood, I always say to him, Jason, enjoy your lunch up at Goodwood, because you go racing first before the match in the evening. And I say to him, please, Jason, enjoy your lunch, have a plenty of beers and wine, because he's a good player. And they've got about 5 or 6 England players in the Lord's Taverners side. And, you see the team sheets in the morning, and they're sort of Gladstone Small and all these ex-England fast bowlers, and I'm absolutely terrified. And Jason keeps wicket. He's really good and a good batsman, hard-hitting batsman. So he's a talented guy, very talented guy, and he'll never forgive me for leaving him out. So I've given him a good mention, haven't I, Ben? So he can't be too unhappy.
No, that's true. Yeah, you've spoken very fondly of him, so we'll keep that bit in.
And Mick Mills, again, England international at right back for Southampton. I'm loath to leave him out.
Yeah, some great players. So tell me a bit more about Ivan Golak, because obviously I know the name, but he was a bit before my time, so I don't really know much about him as a player. What was he like as a right back?
So he would have been in the team when I first, as a kid, started going to watch football at the Dell. And he was a groundbreaking guy. And overseas players we don't take for granted. In those days, you didn't have that many of them, particularly at Southampton. And I absolutely love the team he played in. A lot of the matches back then, would you believe, weren't on TV. So I remember our house in Andover, just outside Andover, where I grew up, had a gramophone player in the living room, where in the evenings I would disappear to listen to either local radio, or in those days it was Radio 2. Radio 2 was the equivalent of Radio 5. And that's how I would stay in touch with Southampton, unless it was, sometimes there were FA Cup matches on the TV, but other than that, there was nothing. So, all those idols from those days, your David Armstrongs, Steve Morans, Keegans in this Southampton team, I never got to see them unless I actually went to the game. So you'd listen to most of the matches on the radio. So I probably only actually saw Ivan Golak in person, maybe even only a handful of times. But because he was a groundbreaker and tough, as far I remember it. Older people than me will know more about him as a player, but tough, uncompromising. Again, he could play centrally, but I'm going to play him at right back. And a lot of it is people talk very fondly of him, how good he was. So I must admit, I'm sucked into that a little bit, but I'm also sucked into the fact that team that I grew up watching were an absolute legendary team of Southampton fans. Go back and watch, honestly, if there are DVDs or YouTubes of that team that finished second in the league and so on. It was a really great era to be a Southampton fan, particularly for someone young like me growing up.
Yeah, and I'm looking at his Wikipedia page. He is one of few Southampton players to also play for Portsmouth. He went on loan to Portsmouth in 1985.
Crikey, I'd forgotten that Jason Dodd's back in.
Yeah, and then he managed in Scotland as well. Managed in Dundee in the 90s. So, yeah, bit of a cult hero. Yeah,
everyone loved him. Apparently, he was a great guy. Great guy. Yeah, he's a cult hero at Southampton, I would say, for that era.
That's a great back four, though. Tough tackling, pretty solid, no nonsense. Not many people would be getting past that back four.
Virgil could play it out from the back, but I'm not sure I'd be rolling the ball to Franny inside our own 6-yard box, if I'm brutally honest.
Cool. Okay, so moving forward then into your midfield, is it a flat four or is it a bit of a diamond? How does it look?
It's definitely not a flat four with God on the left. Yeah. I mean, God knows where he would go. He can drift inside, so the two central midfielders can sit a little bit deeper. And my left-sided midfielder can drift. In fact, I'm going to be like Alan Ball with his instruction to him. He can do whatever he wants. He can go wherever he wants. He's that good. So the two central midfielders would have to sit a bit deeper. They're not going to bomb on.
Okay, and who have you got in the centre?
Easy decisions. The greatest Southampton player of all time in my eyes is Steve Williams. He was my hero growing up. He was my poster boy. I used to get Match and Shoot in all the magazines when I was younger, and literally my bedroom was just plastered. Not dissimilar to Sam Chamberlain's now, to be honest, but Steve Williams was my favourite player. Honestly, he was a brilliant central midfielder. And it's quite funny because of course back then I didn't know him personally. I just loved him. Wore number 4, bossed it in midfield, brilliant passer of the football. Put his foot in as well. He could tackle, and there were some horrendous tackles, Steve Williams. And then he went to Arsenal, which absolutely broke my heart. Honestly, absolutely broke my heart when he left. I couldn't believe it. And it's funny talking to the guys who knew him at Arsenal. And he was quite a character, Steve Williams, to say the least. Got himself into a few run-ins, but as a player, he was the best in real life I've ever seen wear a Southampton shirt. He was absolutely mercurial centre midfielder.
Wow,
brilliant on the ball. Should have played for England much more. And I just loved watching him. I've done a few sort of votes for and been asked for my favourite, and lots of people ask on Twitter, who's your favourite Southampton player of all time, and so on. And I'm loath to not say Tiz, but Steve Williams is the player I enjoyed watching more than any other, and I'd play him alongside the player who I always said was the best central midfielder I saw in a Southampton shirt since Steve Williams, really. Also wore the same number in Morgan Schneiderlin. Yeah. Obviously, I saw a lot more of him because I've seen a lot of Southampton and obviously presented games in which he played. And at Southampton, he was just absolutely brilliant. I'm amazed we've not seen it since. I think possibly the stage at Old Trafford was too much for him. And at Everton, it's been in sort of fits and starts, hasn't it? While at Southampton, he was our best and most consistent player week in and week out. He could do the lot. He could pass the ball. He was a good, decent tackler, could get forward. Just a terrific athlete as well. Brilliant athlete, Morgan. Lovely bloke. Great fun to interview. I remember asking him one time how he learnt English, and he said it was watching Only Fools and Horses on the team bus. Everyone loved him. Great character. Really, really good guy. Big part of that team. Again, it was not quite like the Steve Williams level, but was gutted when he left. And again, this is an area where we've had some really, really good players recently. Your Victor Wanyama's. People older than me would probably pick a Terry Payne or an Alan Ball, but I obviously never saw them play in real life. I've seen them play on video and DVD and so on. And were obviously great players, but I couldn't pick them because I never really saw them. So Williams and Schneiderlin absolutely leap off the page. Two of my easiest decisions. Loved watching them both.
Yeah, wow. I mean, again, Steve Williams. I'm fortunately not old enough to have seen him play, but I've heard the stories. But Morgan Schneiderlin, he was absolutely incredible, just pure class.
Definitely.
I think probably my favourite player in that Southampton team that came up into the Premier League.
This will sound bad, but he was almost too good for us at one stage.
Yeah.
And I remember saying to Ginev, because we were working together at the time, he is going to tear it up at Old Trafford. This guy is the real deal, which is why I was really surprised. It just didn't work out for him. Some people in that red shirt on that stage at Old Trafford, it just doesn't suit them, and it didn't seem to suit him. He's someone I'd love to see back at Southampton one day. I think he'd thrive back in that, that dressing room, that sort of more sort of family environment. Maybe I think probably suited him. Because I'm the same as you. I loved watching him play. You Ben, you'd have loved Steve Williams then. If you like watching Schneiderlin, you'd have absolutely revelled watching Steve Williams play.
Yeah, well, he sounds like my kind of player. What or which modern day Southampton midfielder would you compare Steve Williams to? Say that he was similar to?
Yeah, it would probably be Schneiderlin actually.
Yeah.
Schneiderlin was more of an athlete than Steve Williams. Steve Williams was better on the ball than Schneiderlin, which is why they'll complement each other perfectly, playing alongside each other. But you speak to some of the Southampton players, they just a class of Steve Williams, just a brilliant central midfield player, real vision. And listen, he did go on and play on the big stage. He did play. He was brilliant at Arsenal. As I say, had a run-in or two with the managers, which I'm sure you can read about elsewhere. And he played for England and should have played a lot more, in my opinion.
So, okay, we've got the big man on the left then, Matt Le Tissier. I mean, we could have a whole podcast just talking about Matt Le Tissier.
Absolutely. It's just a question of where Tiz will be in everybody's team. Everybody's team. Maybe not Ian Brantford's team, but he'll be in everyone you speak to's team. Just a question of where you play him. You can play him off a striker. If you speak to Tiz, he enjoyed playing under Alan Ball more than any other manager because Alan Ball gave him such freedom. I'm going to say to him, play on the left because his great mates behind him in Franny, who might be able to control him a bit. I mean, you're never going to get a great defensive display out of him, are you? But and you wouldn't want to because you want him to be going forward, and Morgan can tuck in if necessary. But yeah, I'd let him drift into central areas because he was just devastatingly brilliant. Of all the players we'll talk about, he was by far the most talented sportsman, brilliant cricketer, but just with the ball at his feet, he was just a magician, absolute magician. And you still never tire of watching the goals against Newcastle. His favourite's actually the goal he scored against Blackburn, but I think that's probably because Flowers was in goal. And that was one of my favourite events I've ever hosted, actually, at the Mayflower Theatre when we did I hosted it, an evening with Matt Le Tissier, packed auditorium. It was so much fun. And Mark Crosley came down and he took a penalty against him, see if he could save it again. It was just a really good evening because he's a great storyteller. He does one of the best sort of after dinner routines, Tiz, where he'll have you in absolute stitches. Great sort of comic timing. Very, very funny with lots of his stories and him talking about the various Southampton teams and the trouble he got into. And I love hearing about when he played for Alan Ball and again got himself into trouble, but never in trouble because Alan Ball let him get away with murder. But he did that because he was such a brilliant player and on the field delivered, And again, you could play so many people in that position. All the Wallaces, Danny probably being the best, could have played there. Sadio Mane was absolutely brilliant, though I think he'd probably been the best he's played would be in a Liverpool shirt. But again, a terrific player that could be an option. But you've got to play Le Tiz. I mean, absolute no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, he was the player that just sort of got me into supporting Southampton. Just watching him on Match of the Day was just
brilliant.
He was like an alien. It was
ridiculous.
He was playing a different game to everybody else. I think if you watch the top 10 Matt Le Tissier goals, I can't think of any player who's played in the Premier League who's got a better top 10 goals than Matt Le Tissier.
No, I don't think anyone would argue with that, would they?
I mean, you've named a couple there. The ones at Newcastle, the one against Blackburn, the chip against Schmeichel, the last goal at the Dell. Like, they're all just incredible goals.
The Schmeichel one's brilliant because Schmeichel hated nothing more than being chipped. If you ever chipped him in training, apparently he would absolutely go mental. So for Tiz to make him look like a bit of a clown, didn't he? Must have been immensely satisfactory. And things like that. I always say to Tiz, why do you never celebrate? And he just simply says, because I was always knackered. Which sort of sums him up.
What a legend. What an absolute legend. Opposite wing, have you gone for the similar sort of player or something a bit different, a bit more pace?
Bit different, and would work much harder. But this came down to two more recent players, actually. This was James Ward-Prowse, who's been so good for us. And I know he left off bad terms, but what a start Adam Lallana was for us over such a long period of time. Again, I've picked a good team of characters here because, again, Adam's someone I got to know a bit in his time at the club and when he was captain and at the awards and stuff. And he was just always an absolute joy to deal with. And one of the most talented players, not quite on the Letizier level, but just immensely talented. I'm so sad for him that it didn't work out at Liverpool through sheer bad luck, really. Injuries are what cost him. If he'd had a real good run in that team, I think he could have become a proper Liverpool player. I feel sorry for him that it didn't quite work out in the end, even though he had a terrific time there and won plenty and had some great performances. But we got the best of him at Southampton. Through great when a player comes through the system and the academy and then played for us, obviously at a lower level and stuck with us. And then when we reached the top level, he was just absolutely outstanding. Work rate, ability, could score goals, great energy, technically very, very good, Adam Lallana. And he wouldn't have to play on the right, but I think that's probably the best position for him in this team. I'm loath not to pick any of the Wallaces. I'm loath not to pick James Ward-Prowse because it will be hopefully he'll captain us for years to come and will be in all the teams in 5 years' time. But just at the moment, I think Lallana edges him out because that was a great period, wasn't it? The Lambert, Lallana link up, and it was just a great time to be a Southampton fan, rising through the leagues and then thriving at the top level.
Yeah, and again, same as Jose Fonte, like playing, when we were down in League One Championship, coming through as a youngster and then breaking it into on the Premier League, playing for England, and it was a real sort of poster boy for Southampton at that time. And he looks decent again at Brighton this season.
It's a great signing. I was saying to everybody, and I've got lots of friends who are Brighton fans, he's a player. To get him on a free, I mean, no offence to Brighton, he could walk into the majority of Premier League sides. I'd love to have had him back. It's just a shame, as you say, bridges were burnt. It was an unsatisfactory way for it to end, and I'm sure that's the only reason why he might not be in some Saints fans' all-time 11, just from the bad taste that left. But knowing Adam a little bit as I do, he's not that kind of lad at all. He'll regret that a bit and probably might do things differently in hindsight. But feelings were running high at the time, and who could begrudge him a move to a club like Liverpool? But when he was in that Southampton shirt, he was fantastic for such a long period of time. And I have honestly no regrets about putting him in the team whatsoever. And if James Ward-Prowse listens to this, he's very close. Don't hate me for it. What a great decision that was to take the captaincy off Højbjerg and give it to Ward-Prowse. Inspired management, that really, really good management.
That's a strong midfield four. That's solid in the middle, but can play a lot of good football, a lot of talent, a lot of flair on each wing.
And I'm pleased I haven't gone. I personally haven't gone for players who obviously have come through at Southampton, but probably had their best days in other shirts. Like I haven't picked a Gareth Bale on the left, which a lot of people would do. I haven't picked a Theo Walcott, a Sadio Mane. To be honest with you, Danny and Rod Wallace would be ahead of them actually for the service. I've picked players who did the business in red and white stripes.
So now we come to your strikers. I'm interested to see, have you gone for two players that you think would form their own sort of formidable partnership, or have you just gone for two strikers that in their own right were sort of legendary players for Southampton?
Both. They'd be absolute dynamite, these two. And you've got to remember, we have had some. I mean, the list I've got here, and I'm only going to name a few of them. The list of great strikers we've had. To think that Kevin Keegan played in a Southampton shirt, Marion Pahars was a bit of a cult hero for a while. Loved singing Pahars, my lord, and all that kind of. It was just great times. And Danny Ings is hopefully going to go on and be an absolute Saints legend. But it came down to 3. And to think that Danny Ings isn't even in that 3, and there are so many other great strikers. Ian Dowie is going to hate me because he's become a good friend, and others. There's loads. But it came down to 3, and the one to miss out is Ricky Lambert, which I feel terrible about because he was brilliant
harsh.
for us.
Yeah.
I know. Isn't that shocking?
Yeah.
It is really harsh. It is really harsh. He was brilliant for Southampton. Absolutely brilliant. And it just shows the quality of the 2 I have chosen, that Ricky, who honestly I just loved. I remember being so emotional when he scored for England. But anyway, I mean, the 2, to think that Mick Shannon and Alan Shearer played for Southampton is just so satisfactory. And Mick Shannon, when anyone asks me who my hero is, because he spans my 2 loves, horse racing and Southampton Football Club, I mean, how could I not have Shannon in my team? And we did, for the first Royal Ascot we ever did on ITV, which would be 2017, I said, I've got one wish in this job, and that would be to do a feature on Mick Shannon. And they gave me the green light. So I went to his yard at West Ilsley and had, 2.5, maybe 3 hours with the great man, wandering around his yard, sitting, chatting, seeing the great horses that had trained at his historic yard. And there had been some of the great horses trained there. I mean, just was 2 of the best hours of my life, I think. And I had to cut it down to a feature that ran just for a few minutes, but hopefully it made for good TV. And yeah, he's just an absolute hero and a legend of mine. Great character, great fun, brilliant striker, lived life to the full, still does. Has had a roller coaster life, really. But as a striker, he was just, you only have to look back at his goal scoring record for us and for England to see what a great he was. And then you could argue that Alan Shearer is the greatest player ever to pull on a Southampton shirt, even when he talked about all the greats, the Keegans and Chiltons and all these guys. And to think, he came through the ranks, what a spot he must have been to get him down south into the academy, because he was a very different player, the Shearer I remember watching at Southampton, to the Shearer that then flourished, particularly at Blackburn, and in a Newcastle shirt, where he became just an absolute battering ram, didn't he? But at Southampton in his younger days, he was quick. I mean, lightning quick, and had the lot. He was just a natural goal scorer and just an absolute defender's nightmare. Tough, good in the air. But in his time at Southampton, you watch back how lean and fit he was compared to the Shearer he became for England as well. Just one of the all-time great strikers, really. And we were very lucky to have him, and should be very proud of the way we nurtured him.
Absolutely, what an incredible player. And it's interesting that you picked him. You mentioned earlier how you didn't pick certain players that you felt had their best days away from Southampton, the likes of Bale and Mane. I mean, the same could be said about Shearer. Like, his goal scoring record at Blackburn and Newcastle were absolutely incredible and sort of far surpassed anything that he did at Southampton.
I would still argue he was great in a Southampton shirt, and then went on to become one of the all-time great England strikers. So he was on a slightly different level to some of those other ones I've talked about, who've obviously gone on to become great players. But, Alan Shearer walks into any England team, doesn't he? Great England team of all time. And when I started out, I thought, I thought, crikey, I could have played Ricky Lambert with Steve Moran playing off him. Moran was just absolutely like a Duracell battery. He was relentless back then. One of my favourite players growing up, and I feel dreadful. He's not even come close, which shows how many good players we've had play for us.
Yeah, very true.
But I couldn't. If I left out Shannon, I couldn't sleep, and Ricky Lambert hurts. But I mean, Shannon and Shearer. I mean, please, if those 2 don't score goals for this team, I give up.
So now we move on to your captain. You've got a few candidates in this team for skipper, but who's going to be wearing the armband?
There's a few who could captain the team in there, but it came down to Steve Williams or Jose, and I'm going to give it to Jose because he's a real team man, and just one of our great captains. One of our great captains. Wouldn't go down as the greatest player Southampton's ever had, but I think goes down as a great team man and a captain. So Jose will carry the armband.
This is probably slightly less of a contentious question now that I know Ricky Lambert is not in your team, but who's taking the penalties?
Oh, it is all day long. Shearer can, yeah. Shearer took a mean penalty, but we've got the greatest penalty taker of all time there. Letizia, if he's still on the pitch, he's not too knackered. He might have to come off after an hour quite frequently, in which case Shearer could step up. But no, Tiz is the greatest penalty taker I've ever seen, and his record speaks for itself.
So you are the manager of this side, but you can pick any Southampton manager, past or present, to be your assistant manager. So who are you going to have alongside you in the dugout?
I think a lot of people will say Laurie McMenemy, but he's probably the greatest manager we've ever had in terms of achievement. But my favourite manager is Mauricio Pochettino by a distance, really. Just an absolute cool dude who was so kind to me. He always pretended he couldn't speak English, but I interviewed him at the end of Season of Wars, and his English was excellent. And great sense of humour, unbelievably passionate. As we saw, I remember on Monday Night Football one night when the wheels came off for Spurs, you saw the real Maurizio, he's got that Argentinian passion burning inside him, but it's just the loveliest bloke. And he'd always, even when I was presenting a Tottenham game, he'd always, sometimes when the cameras were on, he'd come and give you a hug, and you didn't get to see it too often, I suppose, on TV, because he was quite guarded, and Nicola Cortese liked him to conduct himself in a certain way, but just a lovely bloke, heart on his sleeve, and did an unbelievable job at Southampton. Be great entertainment to work with him.
Yeah, definitely. And then the final question for you, for your ultimate Saints 11. It's quite a hard one to talk about on a podcast, but describe the kit that your team are going to be wearing. What year of Southampton shirt is this Southampton 11 going to be wearing?
To be honest, I think that's easy. I'm not a great fan of the Palace Peruvian, whatever way you want to call this strip. Bring back the stripes, I say. So it would be absolute old school red and white stripes, probably from the 80s, and it would have to be Draper Tools on the front.
Yes, classic.
Yeah, I think that's easy. I'll let you into a secret. I was given a shirt the other day, and I love Southampton to the core, but they spelt my name wrong on the back. I daren't tell them. I need to scratch out one letter, but they'd be very kind to me, so I'm never going to ever complain. But in terms of choice of strip, red and white stripes, Draper Tools, easy.
Fantastic, iconic. What a strip. Well, listen, Ed, we've reached the end of your Southampton Ultimate 11. And all that's left is for me to read your team back to you and hope that you haven't had any changes of heart. So you've got the legend of Peter Shilton in goal, a back four from right to left of Iman Golak, Virgil van Dijk, Jose Font, who is also your captain, and Franny Ben Ali at left back. Two deep line midfielders in Steve Williams and Morgan Schneiderlin. You've got Adam Lallana on your right wing, Matt Le Tissier on your left wing, who's also your penalty kick taker, and then the dynamic duo of Mick Shannon and Alan Shearer up front. You have got Pochettino alongside you as your assistant manager, and your team will be wearing the 1980s red and white striped Draper Tools Southampton home kit. So that's everything. How does that sound?
Well, that's strong. But listen, if I'm first into bat here, people are going to disagree, which is all the fun of it, really. The only thing I disagree with it when you say Le Tissier left wing doesn't sound great, does it? Le Tissier floating in behind Shannon, because we need a little bit of creativity in behind Shannon and Shearer. So Le Tissier in that hole, and Morgan might just have to drop into the left there. I'm loath to tie Le Tissier down on that left wing. That is dynamite. Shannon and Shearer with Le Tissier floating in behind. I defy any team to take us on there. Crikey.
Definitely. And don't worry, I will make sure everybody knows that Matt Le Tissier has completely free license to roam about and do whatever he wants in your team. Ed, all that's left to say is thank you very much for being involved. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for talking us through your ultimate Southampton 11.
Ben, absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.